Thank you, Rodney.
I got a question.
Perfect.
So about 2 years ago, our neighbor over here, Exxon, I won't call it a surprise, that is engine number one.
It was a surprise.
Okay. So when you look back at that, you know, not to be critical, but hey, what were the lessons learned there? There's a massive size corporation, and like you said, it was a surprise. What happened? And how would you say, here's the things to do to prevent such a thing from happening again?
There's a long answer to that, and it's going to involve a lot smarter people than me, but I'll give you a couple of quick things. One is it shouldn't have been a surprise because they had gotten a majority support on an ESG proposal a year or two before that. They got BlackRock voting against them on something. Look, they're not a professional services firm. They're an oil and gas firm. To get an ESG proposal and get majority support, the people that are concerned about getting return on their investment are actually voting to restrain their investment or retrain or something like that. The reason that they got the majority support, BlackRock said explicitly, was they will not engage with us. They, meaning the directors. They could get engagement from IR and stuff like that. That is a canary in a coal mine. Not every company's going to have that, but you look at what are the signals coming in, and can we take down the temperature in the room or pull the thorn out of the paw or something like that. The reason engine number one won, and they had 25 basis points of the stock.
It was tiny, it was way less.
Maybe not even that. There are two reasons they won.
It was probably up 25 basis points.
One is that even though it was a new fund with had more money than I had in my pocket, but in the scale of Exxon's market cap, they had no economic interest in it. But they were tapping into the zeitgeist, right? They were a useful idiot. I'm not saying they're idiots, but they were the useful idiot for a lot of people who were unhappy. And they got nominees who look pretty good. I didn't work on that one, but I was talking to one of the advisors who was working on it. He at the time he was saying, I think it was a comms guy, I don't understand why shareholders would want these nominees. He's already got better people with more experience in that working for him. And I said, and it's true, the answer is they work for him. If you're on the board, he works for you. Now, that may not really be the model at Exxon, but that's the model of every one of their investors. So it was tapping into kind of long-standing investor discontent, the activist was, and nominees that were pretty credible. Carl Icahn doesn't nominate credible nominees. Just look at what he did recently at Illumina, who was sitting in his bullpen on the day he nominated. I think the other thing, this really gets overlooked. Engine number one was a relatively new fund. I forgot the name of the guy that runs it, but he's not the one that ran the campaign.
Not Charlie Penner.
Charlie Penner, who was at JANA, had left JANA, and he was in his garden leave or whatever they call it with a hedge fund, and he was running that campaign for them, and he was out there, and JANA was always really good at doing the analysis, the strategic analysis and the financial analysis of the company, and then who could actually fix this? Not simply who has a good resume, but who's the right person at the right time. Charlie Penner is a big part of the reason that engine number one got that far. I think there probably are some others, but it's those two things. Biggest thing though, the biggest takeaway, you can't control for Charlie Penner's going to run a contest against you. But the biggest thing is, what are the warning signs that are out there, and are they making their way into the boardroom? I was on a board call earlier this year with a company that Icahn was running a proxy contest at, and the directors were, first of all, it's a great board. It truly is a great board, and I have said no to more boards than anybody that you're going to meet. So when I say it's a good board, you should believe there's some credibility. It's a good board. They hadn't been engaging with the shareholders until this proxy contest got started, and they weren't in the later phase after everything's definitive. They were sort of on a fact-finding mission. They had a really well-regarded CEO from another company who was reporting back to the board on what he'd been hearing. And one director cuts him off at some point, really angry, goes, why haven't we been hearing any of this thing? Because what they were hearing was off with their heads, right? There were some very angry shareholders out there for understandable reasons, but very angry. None of that had been making its way into the boardroom, either filtered out by the CEO or maybe the CFO or maybe the IR and this is a probably more common explanation of it. It's not that they were filtered out, it's that the way things were expressed had gotten everything really watered down. Those are the things I would look out for. You're faced with the problem of how do I look around the corner, right? You can't see around the corner until you get there. But look at who's ahead of you. Look at how the shadows are cast. Look at people coming toward you. How are they reacting? But the main thing is find data that's outside of you. If you're on a board and worried about this, that's the thing I would look at. It's not that you have a problem, but how do you know you don't have a problem?
I think Exxon thought they were immune for two reasons. One is we were actually representing another activist, and Exxon basically said, have at us. we've got this massive retail shareholder base. You're going to spend millions of dollars smiling a dollar into these retail shareholders. And I think with engine number one, the small stake that they had, nobody thought they'd get any credibility. And I learned my lesson. Even though Chris and I are friends, when he was at ISS,
We weren't always.
Yeah, it was a love-hate relationship because I think of probably the 50 recommendations that I got out of Chris, 49 of them went against me and my clients. And the reason I mention that is one of them was an activist, Engaged Capital, who owned 0.5% in a company. And you just didn't think that they were going to have any credibility with ISS. They didn't have a big enough stake. They weren't a big enough shareholder. But you found a way to recommend for them at this company. And I think Exxon just really underestimated how much.
It's the looking
idea,
at the wrong problem. I was using this metaphor last night, but I think it's right. It's the drunk looking for the quarter where the light is best, not where he dropped it. The thing is, it doesn't matter how many shares you have as an activist. You're not going to win on your own. The quality of the ideas, and then how well you express those ideas, how well you tie them to the concerns of, frankly, a pretty heterogeneous shareholder base that is what really matters. Charlie is phenomenal at that. I don't remember your client there, but apparently,
Exxon?
no, this particular one that you're talking about from years and years ago. But that is what
I'll
a
remind
good
you after.
activist is really good at. Carl Icahn doesn't fit this pattern, but if you watch Nelson Peltz at Disney, he hasn't put out a white paper yet, but when he does it, look at what he's doing. He's not talking to the board, even though the board can read that. He's really talking to what do I think are the major concerns among the big pockets of shareholding out there. It doesn't matter how many shares he's got or he's got a former executive who's working with him. It's not enough to win the vote. He has to win everybody else's confidence. And when an activist goes really bad, it's because they completely forget that. They figure that the argument makes itself and they don't bother to make it.
I think a big part of Exxon was cultural and societal factors, kind of a confluence of those things. I think the lesson from it is, how do you activist-proof your board? And I think looking at things like board refresh, what is our governance plan going forward? What story are we telling shareholders? And I used earlier, and I like the analogy of being don't be the slowest gazelle, right? And so if you are on a board, don't make yourself an easy target for an activist by missing some of these, softballs. Change the disclosure, think about a board refresh, think about your average tenure, your diversity on the board. Don't be the person that's the easiest target.
I was actually in a meeting not long ago with a man who was with Engine One and who went on the board. And he was trying to convince everybody about how appreciative ExxonMobil was of what they did and how much they enjoyed having him on the board. And I just thought, what planet is this man living on?
Steep hill to climb.
Anyway, I thought, wow. Okay, there is a question here. Recent news articles have disclosed how the government has restricted free speech by influencing actions at social media companies. As boards watch this play out, what should boards be considering and working on with management to ensure good governance of their companies?
So there's a whole morass there. I'm going to try not to wade into it, and I'm going to leave the social media companies aside. But the responsibility of the directors is to the shareholders. It's not to the sovereign state. I'm not trying to be treasonous or anything like that, but there are people who take care of that. There's, among other things, when you're doing mergers, there's the Oversight Committee of the Treasury, FASB, and NASB. Anyway, there are numerous regulators, all sorts of people who are looking out for the national interests, the sovereign interests. They may sometimes overstep, but your responsibility as directors is not any of those. Your responsibility is to the shareholders. And if you focus on that lens, which I know is not an easy one, I think that's really, again, the North Star that you want in all this. The thing I go back to it's not the social media because it's before social media, but back when during the financial crisis in 2008, when Bank of America was told it needed to buy Lehman? No, who'd they buy?
Bank of America?
Bank of America bought Merrill Lynch. Thank you. Bought Merrill Lynch. At some point, the chair and CEO was the same individual. At some point, started to think this was a bad idea, and he probably wasn't wrong because we still didn't know, when the bottom was going to hit and how far down it would be, and went back to the regulators and said, "I really don't think so." And they said, "Look, you're going to do this, or we're going to take over your board, we're going to get you fired, and we're going to move on with it. His responsibility as CEO is probably a little different. I mean, for one thing, he should be thinking about his family and his job and all that kind of stuff. I absolutely agree with that. As chairman, his responsibility was to say, have at it. I mean, my responsibility is not yours. My responsibility is my shareholders. The reason we shouldn't do this transaction is my shareholders. And if you think about how that played out, it came out a month or so later, but before they actually had the vote, that the hole at Merrill was deeper or bigger than anybody had thought. It's not that everybody, and this didn't come out about the chair CEO until much later, it's not that he was necessarily right that he was being hoodwinked or anything like that. It's that the conflict there was not, the conflict was between what might be in the national interest and what was the interest of his shareholders. And maybe the way that gets resolved is there's the opposite of a sweetener, there's a price cut or something like that. But fundamentally, I think that's the responsibility of the board of directors. Now, how it plays out with the social media companies, look, I'm not real fond of them, so I'm probably not the best one on this, and there's a difference between free speech law and free speech culture, and I'll leave all that kind of stuff there. But fundamentally, what those directors should be thinking about is not what does a government want us to do, the U.S. or China or anybody else, but what's in the best interest of our shareholders. I don't know where they come down on that. You get well beyond free speech into things like safety and that kind of stuff online, but that's fundamentally what it has to be.
I'll take a slightly different tact on the question. I have a client who has some disagreements with the government on certain of its policies, environmental and otherwise, and they've chosen, for some reason, their quarterly reports, their periodic reports, to air these grievances. And you can almost hear the CEO, the CFO, chief operating, you can almost hear them reading to you these paragraphs that show up in their industry section. And our advice to them is always, just be mindful of your forum. Your periodic filings, that's not the place to air these grievances. That's not the place to have this fight. So check the box, file the disclosure document, and then pursue other avenues if you are, if you disagree with the policy, because we've seen company after company really step into it on social issues, government issues, all of these kinds of things. And so let's just keep our, let's play in the sandbox that we belong in, and then if you have, these other fights, fight them in an avenue that's more conducive and that you're more likely to win.